Okay, so thank you very much to Gemma, who is, as usual, making sure that we function technically, thanks to everyone at the JLE, and to all of you who joined me on this this session, which is the theme that we deal with on Wednesdays, is the theme of great ideas. Monday, as you know, we look at mitzvahs. Wednesdays, we look at ideas. And first of all, greetings to all our participants. Greetings and mazel tov to the Katzman family, who had a baby boy this morning in Yerushalayim. Should be well and healthy. And Mr. Hashem, let us know how you're all doing. Greetings to the Brand family in South Africa, and Mitra, Abe, Safra family, the Paul Bogans again, Darren, nice to have you with us again, Mark Curtis, and everyone else. Please forgive me if I don't greet you personally. Sometimes I don't see all the names on the screen, but you're all welcome, and thanks for joining me. What I'd like to do is continue looking at fundamental ideas in the panorama of Torah. And what we began last week, we took a slight deviation to talk about Torah in honor of Shavuot. What I'd like to do is return to the theme we began a few weeks ago, which is the theme of free will. What we discussed, you'll remember on that occasion, and if you weren't with me, you're welcome to download the recording. That was the most thorny, probably the most thorny and difficult area in this category of Torah. That is the question of divine foreknowledge and free will. Right? We discussed that. I gave sources for it and references. That is one particularly thorny problem. Another very thorny problem, which Mr. Hashem will deal with in the coming weeks, is the question of one person's free will interacting with other people. Very difficult issue. But on this occasion, let's turn our thoughts to the underlying principles of free will. What is the concept of Bechira Chofshit, which is the concept of free will? Let me try to work through the basics. Again, in the distant past, we have dealt with the subject in the JLE Live. You can find recordings on the subject. Let me take the opportunity to promote my own book on the subject, which is Will, Freedom and Destiny. This came out a couple of years ago. Free Will in Judaism. It is now being done in Hebrew. I'm working through it in Hebrew, and I think I mentioned before the Hebrew edition will have the material of the English edition, and then the second half of the book will actually have the sources documented, not just the references, but the actual printed out sources, so you can actually read the Hebrew sources and actually go through them yourself. Rabbi Yechiel, I'm thrilled that you're enjoying it, and I hope you'll have a chance to work through the Hebrew copy, the Hebrew edition, with all the original sources when you can. I see that the social media streaming has just come on live, so let me repeat my thanks to Gemma and everyone at the JLE, and mention that what we are studying in this session is the question of free will. Not particular applications, which we've done in the past and I hope to return to in the future, but to lay the groundwork of what free will is in Judaism and how it operates. So let me ask you to keep yourself muted. Please feel free to send through a question. I see it in my chat section. Of course, if you're on one of the media other than logged into our JLE session, then I can't see you. So you'll have to send questions through later on email via the JLE. But if you're in our session live, of course you're very welcome to ask questions. But do me a favor, please. Make sure the questions are totally, immediately on track. Exactly the particular subject we're talking about. And if there's any doubt, hold the question until I have a chance to go a little further. Very often I'll answer something that might be bothering you as I work through the subject. Okay, let's tackle the subject of free will and see how far we can get. I'd like to do this thoroughly from a basic point of view and lay down the fundamentals, the building blocks, so that we have a strong foundation on which to build basically all of Judaism, because there's very little as fundamental as this idea. Let me explain what I mean. First of all, you know that what we call Bechira, or free choice, free will, free choice, is the crowning glory and the basis that forms the substratum, if you like, for what a human being is. The reason for creating a human being is to give us free will. Let's put it in religious terms or dogmatic terms. The way the Torah puts this is, it talks about a concept called Tselem Elokim, Tzelem Elokim we translate in English as a divine image. It means that the human being is formed in a divine image. The whole world is formed in a divine image. Every animal and every rock also bears a divine imprint. But the human being is a closer representation, a higher order representation of God in the world. We're not talking here about Jews, we're talking about humans. That is a human faculty, the faculty of free will. Tzelem Elokim. Let's go a little bit further. By the way, if you'd like a textual source for that, there are many sources. The Sforno says that in his commentary on Tzelem Elokim in Bereshis. The Meshech Chochmah, actually, in the very first or second page, his commentary on the Torah, when he comments on free will, on the concept of Tzelem, or the divine image, identifies it very clearly with free will, and many other sources do that as well. What is this concept? What does that mean? How do we reflect? How are we an image of the divine? Why is free will a godly reflection? So stay with me, if possible. We'll go deeply here if we can. The concept of a divine image means that the way God is the way that is projected into the world. Meaning, if you look at the projection in the world, you can go back and see something deep about the point of origin. What is it about the human form, the human structure in the world, the human reality in the world, that reflects God most deeply? Is it our appearance? Well, that's true. We do have a unique appearance. The human face has certain unique features, which are a closer representation of the divine. The fact that we stand vertical, unlike most of the rest of the biological world, or the animal world. There are many features that reflect this. But the deepest one, without any question of doubt, is our free will. That means that where we are most accurately reflecting the divine is in our free will. Let's put it this way. There are only 2 points of freedom in the system. It's a wonderful thing to understand this. There are only 2 points of freedom in the system of creation. God and us. There are only 2 things that are free. Hashem, God, does exactly what he wants with no constraints. And amazingly, the human being, we are capable of doing what we want with virtually no constraints, or the parallel concept of no constraints. Nothing else in the universe is like that. No animal, no molecule, no chemical, no planet, no alley cat ever does what it's not supposed to do. All the rest of the creation, below us, so to speak, above us, all components of the creation always do exactly what they're programmed to do. Right? Never deviate from that at all. The only creature capable of doing what it's not supposed to be doing is you. Well, with all due respect, I'm sure all you listeners, participants in this webinar are spiritual black belts. I'm sure you always do what you're supposed to do. But in theory, the human being, mere mortals like myself, can do things that they are not programmed to do. Elliot is asking the perfectly appropriate question, what about angels? Let's put it like this, Elliot. Creatures beneath us, like animals, don't have free will. Creatures above us, like angels, don't have free will. Angels see too much. I would say, to make a map, the human being is pitched at an interface between a spiritual world above us, an angelic world, and an animal world beneath us. Animals see too little. All the animal sees is the immediate physical, material aspects of the world. Angels see too much. An angel sees that disobeying his instruction would be passing out of existence immediately. And therefore, angels are too high. No angel ever does what it's not supposed to do. There are some seeming exceptions in Torah. I don't want to go into those now. Angels are conscious beings. But basically, I would give you a very vague analogy. An angel has the sort of free will that you have to jump off a tall building. Do you have free will to jump off a tall building? Well, yes, but you see yourself becoming part of the scenery. So clearly, you wouldn't do it. Let me ask you, do you have free will to walk into a fire? Well, yes, you could. But you wouldn't see the consequences so clearly. An angel sees that disobeying his divine instruction is just moving out of existence. And therefore that's not a workable free will. Amazingly, we are, David, and prophets do have a choice about prophesying. The only point is if they refuse, if they choose not to prophesy, God will force them into it down the line. Right? But they certainly have they certainly can express their will. So it needs separate discussion also, but perhaps if you hold with me through the rest of this conversation, you will get a deeper understanding into exactly the nature of a prophet's free will. So the concept is that very amazingly the human is sandwiched at the interface between a spiritual world above that has no free will, too high, and an animalistic or material world beneath which has no free will, too low. Put it another way, we at that interface feel the pull towards the angelic, the noble, the spiritual, the refined, the elevated. We also feel the pull towards the lecherous, the material, the earthy, the superficial, the lazy, the childish. In that zone of tension, our free will is expressed. You can put it like this. Free will lives in the battle zone between two warring motivations. The spiritual elevated motivation and the animalistic physical motivation. Or in classic Torah terms, the tension between Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Ra. Yetzer in Hebrew, they translate this in very, very inadequate English as evil inclination and good inclination. But actually, Yetzer doesn't mean an inclination, it means a formative energy. Yetzer, Yotzer, is a creator or an artist or a artisan, somebody who forms things. A Yetzer means the spiritual energy, the psychological, emotional, spiritual energy that wants to form you in its own image. The elevated one wants to form you in an angelic image. The lower one, the animalistic one, wants to form you in an animalistic image. The choice is yours. Do you opt to be drawn after the angelic, elevated motivation, or do you choose to be drawn after the lower animalistic devolution? Let me say this one more way, if I may. You know, there are three working parts of the soul. There are more parts as well, but for all intents and purposes, in everyday life, there are three working parts of the soul. There's the lowest part called the nefesh, which is the animal soul. That is what gives you your urges, motivations, appetites, feelings or experiences of the body when you're hungry. The animalistic urges, that's called the nefesh. Contacts the body. Above you is called the neshama, that floats around the head, above the head and around the head. Very, very high spiritual entity, of which we see very, very little in the modern era. So there are two forces. The lower force pulling down into the body, the upper force lifting you potentially into the spiritual world. The middle zone, the middle element of the soul is called the ruach. Ruach is nothing other than a movement between the two. If you know a little Hebrew, you know that the word ruach means movement. Technically it means spirit or wind. Always air that is moving is called ruach. It doesn't exist unless it's moving. Ruach is the movement, the inner life, the movement of inner life. And the ordeal of that inner life is to choose the elevated or choose the fallen. Right? Those are the two formative energies that express the tension that forms the battleground on which your free will battle is fought. That's the zone of free will. Let me put it in one of the most beautiful ways that I know how. I'm sure you'll forgive me if I have a sip. Let me tell you one of the most beautiful ways I know of expressing this. The Medrash says that when God created the human being, when Hashem created Adam, the phrase that he used, as the Torah says, is Na'aseh Adam. Let us create man. Let us create the human being. The Medrash Rabbah asks, why would God express himself in the plural? Na'aseh Adam. Let us make man. Why would Hashem express himself in the plural? If there's one thing Hashem wishes to teach us, it is that he is one. If there's one thing we fixated on in Judaism, it's Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. And therefore, why would he express himself in the plural? There are many answers to this question. I'll give you the answer that is preferred in the Hasidic literature. Right, very beautiful. So they're all in the Medrash, but here's a very beautiful one for all those among you who are into study of the psyche and Hasidus and what it has to say about the psyche. So that explanation is Hashem was speaking in the plural because he was speaking to himself and to us. He said, let us make man, namely me and you. You and I will make you, God said. I will begin your creation and I'll leave you to finish it off. In other words, you're a partner in your own creation. And very, very beautiful insight and totally true. He begins the creation, you finish it off. In the simplistic level, he begins the creation of the body and you finish it off. That's called bris milah, that's called circumcision. But on a higher level, there's a circumcision of the heart. Circumcision of the body applies to men. Women are also involved in a certain way. But certainly when it comes to circumcising the heart, we all need to do that. So that there's two stages of creation. He creates the beginning, and he leaves us to complete the creation. But I'd like to share with you another take that the Medrash has on this, which I think is exquisitely beautiful if understood sensitively. Let us make man, says the Medrash. Hashem was speaking to the angelic forces that he would assemble in making a human being. Sometimes it's put as his midas, his character traits. For example, he addressed chesed, kindness, tzedakah, charity, mercy, justice, truth. He spoke to his midas, his qualities of character, the qualities that he wanted to assemble to constitute a human being. Some said yes and some said no. Some said yes, create human beings, and some said no. Truth, for example, said, emes said, do not create humans. They'll be full of lies. Tzedakah, charity, said, create humans, they'll give charity. So some of these angelic forces, character traits, if you will, said yes, Yibare, he shall be created. And some said no, Al Yibare should not be created. And the battle raged between them. Some saying yes, create man, some saying not, don't create man. Says the Medrash, Ad shatem mizdainim, while you are arguing, says God, I've already created man. Now, stay with me carefully. The simple translation, the thoughtless, superficial translation is, they couldn't solve the problem, so God ignored them. He asked their advice, but they couldn't give advice. Their advice was a stalemate, impasse of conflict, so he ignored them and created the human being. That is not what's being said. What's being said is this, as Ramosha Shapiro used to explain so poignantly. God asked for advice and he took it. What was their advice? An unresolved almighty conflict. That's what he created. In other words, he asked for advice. What was the result of that request? A tremendous battle. Oh, exactly. That's exactly what I will create. He creates a human being who is a battleground of warring and conflicting. By the way, it's beautifully sensitive in the words. If you have a little feel for the language, listen to what it says. Na'aseh Adam in Hebrew has two meanings. Na'aseh means let us, or passive, he has already been. Na'aseh Adam can be translated accurately in Hebrew in two ways. Na'aseh Adam, let us create man, or Adam Na'aseh, he has been done already. While you're arguing, I've already created him. In other words, within your argument has been the origin of his creation. Ad shatem misdanim, while you're busy arguing, kfarna, I've already created him, right? And it's so, as Medrash always is, of course, located perfectly in the language. Okay, I hope you enjoy seeing how these things work on the inside, so to speak. Okay, what do we learn from this? That the very statement of let us make man, let us make a human being, introduces the theme of conflict. Okay, and that of course is the nature of free will. It is a battleground. You are not created to be serenely at peace. You are created to fight the battle between the two halves of your personality. Of course, the real warrior can battle in peace. Anyway, that's another discussion. So let's move on. Next point. Somebody's asking me, was this Moses' lowest point? I'm not sure what you're referring to. This was nothing to do with Moses. This was God speaking to his own angelic forces in the creation of Adam. Okay, we're going long time before Moses was created, so I'm not sure I understand your question. But stay with me, and hopefully we'll all get there. Let us take the next step. Our free will. Sammy, I just explained why he needed advice. I've just explained at least two meanings. Now think about it and you'll see. Right? Okay, let's continue. Our free will is limited in two ways. Let's move into the depth of the discussion. Our free will is limited in two ways. To make this simple, or simpler, I would say horizontally and vertically. What do I mean by that? Let's take a horizontal look at your life. All the areas that you interact with in your life. Your social situation, your financial situation, your health, your marital situation, your academic situation. If you look in all those areas, it's axiomatic in Jewish teaching that you are free in only one of those. There's only one zone of life in which you are free, amazingly. Right? We believe that many aspects, virtually all aspects of your life, are, I'm not sure if the right word is predetermined, or set, or fixed. We believe that free will, real free will, operates in one primary zone. Let me ask you for your opinion where that is. I'll give you 5 seconds to type me an answer, please. Where do you think free will operates? The answer is, well, I'm getting a few suggestions. In the moral zone only. Stay with me, please. This is so important to understand. When we talk about, we need to learn these basics. All of your Judaism is based on this information. I think there may be one or two non-Jewish people in this panel. What we're saying at this point applies to Jews and non-Jews equally. Here I'm not talking about a Jewish faculty. The faculty of free will is a human responsibility, and therefore this is what I'm saying right now is universal. Later we'll discuss aspects of Torah uniquely that apply to Jews, but this is universally human. Stay with me carefully. We assert that free will applies in the zone of ethics or morals. Or put it another way, the battle between good and evil, the battle between the higher self, the moral self, and the lower immoral self. Let me try and make this clear by exclusion. Let's take some other areas. Let's take money, for example. By the way, I'm obviously not referring to the trivial mechanical aspect of choice. When you choose which flavor dessert you're going to eat, that's a free will decision. When you choose which pair of socks you're going to put on in the morning, that's a free will decision. But it's not. Animals make those decisions too. Animals also make selections of where they're going to sleep, what they're going to eat. Indeed, machines can be programmed to make selections. I'm not talking about that. The philosophers would say that's not interesting free will. The fact that you can select whether you'll have vanilla or chocolate, that's not interesting free will. Is it an exercise of free will? Yes, it is. But I'm not talking about that at all. I'm talking about uniquely human free will. Things that no animal can do. That no machine can do. Okay, not even the deepest, most sophisticated aspect of artificial intelligence today can do that, even though the scientists haven't yet decided whether that's the case. But that is the truth. When we talk about bechira, free will in Judaism, we mean moral free choice. We mean the choice to be good and not to be bad. Let me try to prove this by exclusion. Let's take, for example, money. It's basic in Jewish teaching that how much money you will earn in a year is predetermined at Rosh Hashanah. On the first day of the year is predetermined every last cent or penny you will earn that year. There's nothing you can do that can change that. Again, I'm dealing with this in broad outline. Lots of sophisticated discussion about this. So don't try to catch me on the technicalities. I'm painting a broad picture here. The broad picture is that your financial status is not amenable to your free will. I'm sure most of you know that when God decides what the next year holds in store on Rosh Hashanah, on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, your financial status is determined. It's not a moral issue. Now, you have freedom to destroy yourself financially. You can make moves that will destroy you financially. That you certainly can do. Why? Because that's an immoral thing to do. It's irresponsible. There's no limit to how much you can harm yourself financially. That is an irresponsibility and you're free to do it. But you cannot guarantee an income more than a certain amount, no matter what you do, no matter how clever your investment decisions, no matter what you do. You can unpredictably make a lot of money or make no money at all. That is not amenable to your free will, your upper limit. First of all, I don't think you need me to tell you this. Look around the world, you will find people who are highly educated, always make the right decisions, right, according to all the expert opinions, and never earn any money. And there are others who are total idiots and very rich. I happen to know a few, I can assure you. Intelligence, this has got nothing to do, right, or very little to do with amount of earnings. Here I once saw a very instructive interview with Mr. Bronfman. Bronfman is a Canadian Jew. He owns half of Canada, a very famous whiskey producing industry. So he's I think a multi-billionaire. So the interviewer said to him, Mr. Bronfman, how did you get so rich? He said, when I was 10 years old, I bought an apple for 1 cent. Then I sold it for 2 cents. Then I bought 2 apples and I sold them for 4 cents. Then I bought a box of apples and I sold it for $1. Then my grandfather died and left me $61 million. And that's how I began. That is an accurate Jewish insight, indeed, indeed. You make your effort, but the result's not connected to your effort. This is a lengthy discussion of how you tease apart these factors, but I'm telling you that that's the principle. The principle is that we don't put money in the category of free will. Let's take another area. Health. I happen to be a doctor, but you don't need to be a doctor to know that you cannot control your health. You cannot guarantee your health. Now, you can destroy your health without limit. No question. You can be overweight. You can overeat. You can smoke. You could kill yourself. There's no limit to how much you can affect yourself negatively. That's immoral. It's a prohibition, a transgression of a Torah principle, no limits at all. But to guarantee good health, not in your power. You can diet and eat correctly and exercise, and you can do everything and become disastrously ill. Happens all the time. That is not amenable to your free will. Incidentally, related to this is the Kabbalistic teaching that you are born with a certain lifespan that you cannot control. Every human being is born with a ketz. A ketz means a predetermined lifespan. You're given that as a gift. Nothing you can do will add time to that. Can you lose time from your predetermined lifespan? Oh yes, certainly you can. The Rambam makes it very clear. You can lose life by being unhealthy. You can lose life by being spiritually unhealthy. If you speak Lashon Hara, right, evil, wicked or denigrating talk about other people, lose life. The Gemara says that 9 out of 10 people in any given cemetery are there before their time. That's not a possibility. It's the most common outcome. Right? Noah, you are assuming that King Chizkiah never had that extra years of his life determined in the first place on condition that he would do the right mitzvah. Right? How do you know he wasn't given that lifespan and had it cut short because he refused to have children? Right? I think you're making the wrong assumption. So, donating your mitzvahs to extend another person's life, I don't believe that that's correct. Judy, you know that Kibbud Avayim, when the Torah talks about long life there, it's talking about spiritual life. I'm sure you're familiar with that concept. It's not talking about life in this world. So, Ayin Hora, that's completely. Now you're talking about one person foreshortening someone else's life. That's another topic entirely. We'll talk. It's a shame on a future session we'll deal with that. So, your life, there's a limit to, of course you don't know what that limit is. It has no practical relevance. There's a principle that God doesn't tell us when our lives will end. And therefore, that is, yes, can you spend money on Shabbat that will be given to you in addition? Yes, but that's also a condition made at Rosh Hashanah. Yes, Adam gave years to King David. That's quite correct. Yes, Adam asked God whether he would give a spiritual gift. God said yes, and he gave 70 years of his 1,000 to King David, who was an extension of his life. You know the word Adam spells Aleph Daled Mem. Adam David Mashiach. Okay, that's another fantastic subject. Let me ask you to hold these questions, otherwise we'll never get through our primary subject. Each of these is a wonderful discussion in its own right. Let's talk about marriage choices. How much choice do you have there? We know there's someone predetermined or pre-constructed, if you like, in the spiritual world. That's not up to your choice. By the way, your marriage choices are limited. A young man cannot possibly explore a relationship with every woman on earth, even though many modern young men try very hard. But be that as it may, who's presented to you as a marriage option is also limited. If you think about it, you'll realize, and certainly if you understand Jewish sources, we don't assert that you have free will in those areas, and we don't work on those areas. You make a normal, how much effort should you make for your health? What's normal? To start making extreme efforts in terms of illness and so forth, how much effort should you make to earn a living? What's normal? It's predetermined anyway. Why would you waste more hours working when you could be doing mitzvahs or learning Torah? I'm not talking about where your profession is a mitzvah as well. That could be different. Okay, so let's return to our main theme. When we talk about the operation of free will, we talk about moral free will. So as we go through this discussion, please bear in mind, don't start asking me questions that are out of the zone of free will morality. Okay, now, we come to by far the most important area. This requires tremendous focus. Right? You're still on your edge of your seat for this. I don't know how you're sitting in this webinar situation. Maybe you're lounging back horizontal. But at least figuratively sit on the edge of your seat, because what's coming now is the most classically important notion in this whole area, and arguably in all of Jewish philosophical thinking of this type. And that is the notion of Nukudas HaBechira, the point of free will. If you read my book on the subject, you will find this in great detail, and there are lectures online where I try to dissect this more carefully. But let me try to present to you the basics. If we don't get through it all in this session, Mitzvah Hashem will continue. Hashem gives us life, will continue in future sessions. But let me try to do as good a job as I can of presenting this classic, most basic of all Jewish ideas. And again, what we are trying to do in all our learning is develop new ears. Not to take our preconceptions and try to twist everything you hear into what you think you already know. So let's keep an open mind and study this classic idea. Nukudas HaBechira. the point of free will. This runs through all of Torah literature, but it was put in this particular formulation, most famously by Rabbi Dessler, who lived in the last century, a brilliant teacher of this sort of area. His best-known student, I think, probably is Rabbi Mordechai Miller. I heard a lot of this material personally from Rabbi Miller. In fact, as an aside note, I will say that I spent the last couple of years hunting down recordings of Rabbi Miller from Gateshead, Rabbi Mordechai Miller, the clearest recordings I could find of his basic Hashkafa series. He gave maybe 20 or 30 subjects that are absolutely fundamental to understanding Judaism and Torah. He was head of the girls' school, but these were, I sought the ones where he actually presented these subjects to men, because they were more not interrupted with questions and discussion. I found the clearest examples I could, transcribed them from a cassette into digital recordings, and I've made that available on the internet. So if you'd like to download those absolutely classic, these are Rav Dessler's teachings as heard from Rav Dessler, including personal examples that he saw in his relationship with Rav Dessler. This is a life-changing basic course in Jewish Hashkafa. I know of no other course that presents basic Jewish and Torah philosophy in such a cogent and organized fashion. I will, if someone reminds me or requests it, I'll send the link to Gemma at the JLE. You are welcome to download that. It's on a site which is not publicly available, and the reason is very simple. The reason is a lot of the terms that he uses are Hebrew. So, he uses yeshiva type language, Hebrew or Yiddish words thrown in, not suitable for a new audience that has no Torah background, no Hebrew, no Yiddish. So I didn't want to make that available to the public, who would be frustrated in downloading some of those talks and find themselves unable to understand a number of terms. But if you are familiar with the jargon, they are in English, excellent English, but there are a lot of key words that you need a little bit of religious background to understand. But if that's your particular situation, you're very welcome. Please email Gemma at the JLE, and someone reminds me, I'll be very happy to make that link available. I put a lot of work into it, and those are classics. And you'll find there Kudras HaBechira, which is the section dealing with free will and many of its applications. So let me try to present you Rav Dessler's classic formulation. Nekudas HaBechira. Here's what it means. That in any vertical, we spoke about horizontal, let's talk about vertical. Let's imagine a vertical scale of moral choice. Your free will applies only at one level on the vertical scale. Let me say it again. At any point in your life, you are grappling, you are fighting that battle of free will, of the lower against the higher, at your particular point on that vertical scale. If you're high on the scale, you're battling very high and refined and subtle and enormously difficult spiritual ordeals against things that pull you down, which are also subtle and elevated. If you're very low on the scale, you're fighting things that are incredibly brutal and vulgar, and that's where your battle is pitched. For each individual, the battle's the same. It doesn't matter whether you're a beginner fighting a beginner or a grandmaster fighting a grandmaster. The effort's the same, and the reward is the same, because you're only judged according to the effort you make at your level. Let me try to make this a little graphic. Hold the questions, please, and try to understand. And I'm warning you, I say it clearly, there's almost nothing as important as understanding this subject correctly. It explains all of Torah. Nothing moves in Torah. Torah is all a story of moral progress. That's all the Torah is concerned about. The Torah is not concerned, the Talmud, for example. The Torah is not concerned about archaeology and medicine and history, and none of that stuff's important. It's only there as ancillary material for spiritual growth. So, let's understand. Let me give you an example. Let's take somebody low on the totem pole of moral choice. Objectively low. Let's take somebody who hangs out on the street, a young man, violently mugging little old ladies. That's what he does. Why he does that? Who got him into that situation? What social forces resulted in his operating at that particular point? We'll look at in the future, down the line. But right now, that's where he is. His daily ordeal is how to mug another little old lady or a helpless victim and steal their money. Now listen to what Rav Dessler says about this. Right? And every word is based on sources in our sages. Says Rav Dessler, the next time this young man attacks the little old lady and decides that instead of killing her, he's only going to crack her skull, he has made a tremendous moral advance. Please, I'm not talking about the legal issue. This has got nothing to do with the statutory or the legal discussion. That is a completely standardized discussion. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about God's court, the court of the soul. I'm not talking about human court. That individual who's decided to crack that victim's skull instead of killing the victim has done a tremendous spiritual activity. This person will be rewarded in the next world for that mitzvah. Now, I know you saying this is ridiculous. How can this be? I'm telling you, he is battling his battle at that level. If he improves his situation relative to his situation, he's made a tremendous advance. You can't expect that person to be learning another page of Gemara or dealing with his spiritual. He's not at that level. Okay, why he's operating at a low level is not the question now. But given that he is, all he can possibly do is make progress at his level. And therefore, somebody at the top of the scale, well, let's move up the scale. Now I'm going to assert something that may upset you. But if this concept is true, it means that all of you, each one of you participating in this webinar is guilty of theft. Now you're saying to yourself, what does he mean? I don't break into people's houses at night with a black mask and a crowbar. No, I don't mean that. I mean at your level. How many of you have ever had a job working for someone else? Raise your hand, please. I don't see your hand, but raise your hand. You've had a job working for someone else. You're sitting in the office working for this person, and you call your mother. 2 counts of theft against you. Your employer pays for the call, and the 10 minutes you spend speaking to your mother, you're being paid a salary to work. What do you mean you don't steal? You mean you don't hit little old ladies over the head with a brick in the street? You mean you don't break into people's houses at night, but that's not where you're being held accountable? God is not judging you for that. When you die, you die, and you get up to the next world, and God says, what did you achieve on earth? And you say, God, I never hit any little old ladies over the head with a brick. You think Hashem's going to say, amazing shkach? No, it wasn't your problem. He's not going to ask you that. He's going to hold you to account for that phone call you made when you were working in somebody's office. Now, if you work in a town where it's tacitly accepted to make occasional private phone calls, that's fine. How about long distance, though? How about half an hour on the phone? How about coming a little late to work, or leaving a little early, or having long coffee breaks, or not working as hard as you could? That's theft, my friends. That's theft. And you will be punished worse for that than he will for mugging a little old lady on the street. Right? It's not a question of the crime, it's a question of the spiritual battle involved at your level. Yes, Yechiel, of course it does. It means the person on the street who controls himself from an act of violence may receive more spiritual reward than the person at a higher level who controls himself from a word of Lashon Hara. Absolutely. It's in proportion to the position and the difficulty. I'm not talking about the absolute reward. Mitzvahs have an absolute reward, cosmic effect. That's a total different subject. I'm not talking about the legal consequence. I'm talking only about what we call the fum tzara agra, according to the effort that you make at your level. You can only make an effort at your level. Stay with me, I'll build it slowly. One thing at a time. This is worth tremendous effort to get clear. Let's say you never would make a private phone call while you're working for someone. What about Gneva Stars? Let's go higher. What's Gneva Stars? Do you know there's a law in Judaism that if you say something misleading, you say something that is not completely true and you mislead someone, it's called Gneva Das, theft of the mind. It's called stealing. Even if no one was harmed at all, you didn't hurt anybody, you complimented someone, you helped someone, it's called theft. Now it's way more subtle than mugging people on the street or breaking into people's houses and taking their possessions. But if you're on that level, you're accountable for it. You're sitting down to dinner. Yes, Danny, that's a very good, yes, you wake someone indeed. You wake someone who's sleeping. Very serious form of theft. You can't pay it back. You can't pay it back. Indeed. How should you, of course you should work for people, just be honest. Somebody on my panel's asking me, well, why not work for somebody, but be honest. Right? You work honestly. That's the solution. So now stay with me. Stay with me. Waking someone who's sleeping, indeed, very serious question. Can't pay it back to them. Indeed. At least not in kind. Now, Gneva Stars, you're sitting down to dinner. You have an expensive bottle of wine you're about to open with your dinner. Unexpectedly, a friend of yours walks in. You say to your friend, you know what? I'm so glad you've come. I'm now going to open this wine in your honor. You're lying through your teeth. It's called Gneva Das. Now, did you hurt anyone? No. Did you harm anybody? No. But it's a Torah transgression. And it's called theft at your level of spiritual refinement. You visit someone in hospital. On your way out, you unexpectedly notice someone else who's ill, whom you did not know was there. You walk into the room and you say to them, I've come specially to visit you. You're lying through your teeth. Now you did a mitzvah too, but you did a sin as well. Of course, I'm not talking about somebody desperately ill, or somebody who needs you to say that. By the way, the law of Gneva Stars is, you don't have to correct someone if they say it themselves. Let's say you walk into that hospital room, and before you say anything, the person says, thank you so much for coming specially to visit me. You don't have to disabuse them of that notion. You don't say, no, I didn't. No, you don't have to do that. The law doesn't require you to do that. Judy, pretending to shop in a store to copy the styles, there's a couple of problems with that. Yes, if you go into a store, what in England is called a shop, and you don't intend to buy, and you look at the stuff, there are a couple of problems with that. One is you may indeed be misleading the owner or the sales assistant. Another problem is there's a problem of causing suffering, because the person's hoping you'll get a sale, and you raise his hopes in that way. It's an unkindness when you don't. By the way, yes, indeed, if you say, I'm only looking, no problem. Or if you have some intention that you find something really suitable you'll buy, that's also okay. Or where it's well known and acceptable and accepted that's the normal conduct you can do. But it depends on the circumstances, but indeed, that's Gneva Stars. I will give you a little homework exercise in Gneva Stars, if I may. Let me give you a little homework exercise. This happened some time ago, and the question was put to Rav Zilberstein, a famous rabbi in Israel. A man walked into a bank in Bnei Brak. A man walked into a... Rav Zilberstein lives in Bnei Brak. A man walked into a bank in New York and asked the manager if he could have a bank loan. The manager said, yeah, we do loans. How much do you want? The fellow said, I want $200. I'm going abroad for 3 months. I want $200. The manager said, are you serious? That's a tiny loan. You're going to pay 20% interest. I mean, he said, well, look, you advertise loans. So the manager started filling out the forms, and when they got to collateral, the manager said to him, what are you going to leave us as security? You know, we have to take security for the loan. The fellow said, look, I'm going abroad. I don't need my car. It's in your parking lot. Here are the keys. Impound my vehicle. And if I fail to come back and pay the loan, you can sell the car and defray it. It's worth a lot more than $200. Manager said, fine. That's perfectly acceptable. Fellow went abroad. Sure enough, 3 months later, walked into the bank and paid $240 and left. Manager called him back and said, what was all that about? Fellow said to the manager, where else could I get parking for 3 months for $40? Now, here's the question. Is that Gneva Stars or not? On the one hand, total deception. On the other hand, he took a loan, he left value, he paid interest. That's an interesting question. But it's a question at this level of refinement. If you told this story to the fellow on the street mugging little old ladies, he wouldn't see the problem. He'd think that's too wonderful. Why didn't I think of that? But at your level of refinement, and there's no limit. Do you know that according to Jewish law, every word you say has a standard? Every word you say has to be completely true, completely kind, and completely necessary. Let me ask you, please, is every word you ever say completely true, completely kind, completely necessary? It's a transgression if you use unnecessary words, but it's way above the level of the person mugging people on the street. You battling your battle, he's battling his. The grandmaster fighting the other grandmaster, martial arts or chess or whatever it is fighting a desperate battle. And the fellow on the street, involved in knife crime or he's fighting his desperate battle. The point is where you're operating on your point of freedom. So that is the point. That is the point, Nukudas HaBechira. Now, I hope this is clear. Rabbi Dessler has a memorable, very memorable image. He says, imagine two countries at war. When two countries are at war, the entire countries are at war. But the battle and the pain and the conflict is only felt on the front line. That's where the armies meet. That's where the carnage and the chaos is taking place. And as one army advances and the other army is pushed back, previous territory becomes quiet. It's conquered. No battle there anymore. The battle has moved on. Your entire positive side is locked in battle, lethal battle, mortal battle, with your entire negative side. But the battle only takes place at your point of freedom. You who are listening to this, participating in this webinar, you are not battling whether you should mug another little old lady and crack her skull every day. It's not an issue for you. You'd be sick at the thought. And you're probably not battling the battle of the fine nuance of every word, or where your eyes gaze, or where you use every minute of yours to serve Hashem. Some of you may be, but some of you may not be. Those aren't your battles. And here's the thing. When you lose a battle to somebody way superior to you, it's not called a loss. And when you win a battle over somebody vastly inferior, it's not a victory. Victory is only meaningful battling someone who's more or less on your standard. Let me try to illustrate this. I'm getting lots of questions here on side issues. Please, let's focus on Nekudas HaBechira. All the things I use as examples along the way, they're all wonderful subjects. Don't get distracted, okay? You have to learn to focus. So, please, we're not going into all those mitzvahs and all those side points. They're all wonderful subjects. Let's stay focused. Let me give you an example. Let's say you play tennis. You play tennis. Let's say you're a good club player. So you play the best people in your club and you make an effort. Sometimes you win. Usually you win. That's your level. One day you walk out onto the tennis court and you find you've been challenged by a 3-year-old. The child walks onto the court with his racket and his diaper. Okay, let's say you win the battle. Is that meaningful? No. Yes, your name goes up but it's irrelevant. On the other hand, let's say you play the world champion, and during the entire match you never see the ball once. Did you lose? No, you didn't play. That's not called tennis. I hope the point is clear. A victory is only against someone who's a warrior as mighty as you. When you overcome somebody who's vastly inferior, it's not a victory, it's irrelevant. There was no exertion and no growth. When you're beaten by somebody vastly superior, it's not a defeat. You don't have to worry about it. Don't feel bad about that. You weren't on that level. You shouldn't have been playing that individual. Right? The higher you, when you fight in the World Heavyweight Championship, if you win, there's $1 million in it. If you lose, you get your jaw broken. The higher you are, the more difficult the battle, but the more mighty warrior you are, the greater prize, and the greater there is to fall. That's how the scale works. Okay, now, first of all, please give me a quick yes on my screen if we are together so far. This is the first part of the discussion. Please give me a yes so that I can move on. Okay, good. Let's take the next step. I must say, these discussions go a little bit slower than they go when we meet in person because I don't see the faces, I can't see the feedback, and therefore it takes a little longer. I hope you forgive me. We sometimes have to devote 2 sessions to what ordinarily be 1 session when we meet live. Let's take the next step. The point of freedom is not static. It moves. Thank you. No. That's a very good comment. Somebody says if I go slowly, it helps to stick. It goes in. Fun. Wonderful. I'm in no rush. People tell me that people can only concentrate for 40 minutes on a webinar session. I speak for an hour. I give you the credit for being able to stay with me. Let's take the next step. The point of freedom is not static. As you work and exert yourself, it grows, and your point of freedom elevates. David says that after 40 minutes it becomes an act of free will. A battle of free will to stay focused, yes. Let's take the next step. When you pick up weights in the gym, you build muscle, and you have to pick up heavier weights. When you overcome a free will ordeal, you become a bigger person. God sends you a more difficult test. You build spiritual muscle. Yesterday's ordeal becomes trivial, becomes easy. When you beat the people in your tennis club, you must play the champions of the other clubs. When you beat them, you have to play the national champions. When you beat them, you have to play the international people. Because you're becoming a better person, and you move up the scale. Your Nekudas HaBechira improves as you develop it. Of course, you can get out of shape, and it can fall too. Life is a series of ups and downs. The goal is to be raising your point of freedom as you go. Let's take a practical example. Here's a young man, walks into the JLE in London, knows nothing about his Judaism, was never educated, starts learning about Judaism, he's amazed. Here's about kosher food. Very interesting, the spiritual value of kosher food. Unkosher food desensitizes you spiritually. 3 weeks later, goes out for lunch, leaves his office, about to cross the street into the local seafood deli, where they serve shrimp, crab, lobster boiled alive. Not good from a Jewish point of view. But he likes that food. Next door's a kosher deli. Doesn't like that food. For some reason he stops and thinks about it and says to himself, Jewish boy should be eating kosher food. It's very important. Stands there shaking and sweating for half an hour, battling the battle, decides to eat a kosher lunch. Goes across the street, eats a kosher lunch. Tremendous growth. A value has overcome a temptation. That's a tremendous growth step. The next day the battle doesn't last as long, and 2 or 3 weeks later he finds himself eating kosher food out of habit, as is usual. At that point, no more reward, no more battle. He's surpassed that point of freedom. It's now been incorporated. He's now beaten the people in his local club. He's not battling them anymore. There's always a reward for the legacy work that brought you to this point. Let's not forget that. When the person becomes the world champion in his field, right? All the years of work and all the people he surpassed and all the levels he worked on, of course that's all there. But he's not fighting those battles anymore. The army has moved past that place. That's conquered territory. There's no battle in it anymore. And therefore, as you grow spiritually, you surpass. If you're a mature individual, you should no longer be battling or even fantasizing about the things that bothered you when you were 13 and 14 and 15 years old, right? Unless you've failed to grow. If you're a mature adult, you should be grappling with much more adult, refined spiritual temptations than the ones that tempted you when you were a child. You've moved on. That area's been conquered. You have control in those areas. And I hope this is clear. And therefore, the essence of the discussion is to understand that the point of free will is not static. Okay, let's add one more dimension, if I may. We've only just really begun this discussion, but let me add one more dimension, if I may. And then we'll leave till next time the second part of this discussion. And here it is. Let's ask, why is the point of freedom where it's at? Basic question. This person on the street mugging little old ladies, why is he doing that? Why is your point of freedom, your Nakudas HaBechira, pitched where it is? Why is one person grappling with an extra kind word to his wife when he's under strain, and another person battling with violence, morbid and grotesque violence? Why are you functioning there and he's functioning there? The answer is it may not be his fault and may not be your credit, but it's somebody's. This is very, very important and quite shocking part of the discussion. That person mugging people on the street, perhaps he never chose that. Perhaps he was born into that situation, which means he's not accountable for it. He's accountable for his choices at his point of operation, his point of freedom. But he may not be accountable for his point of freedom. Who's accountable for that? His parents, society, the violence of the ghetto, the social situation, the genetics, the chemistry, the social influences. God himself may be accountable. You're not accountable for where you find yourself. You're accountable for how you deal with the point at which you find yourself. Right? Here's a child brought up in violent circumstances, abused, abandoned, the worst of upbringing. And the child finds himself in circumstances that are tremendously morally limited because of that. Does it make any difference to him? No. God is only judging him about how he operates at his point of freedom. Here's another child, brought up in tremendously privileged, spiritually sensitive environment, taught about morality and spirituality, taught about his Jewish obligations. When that child performs a mitzvah, does he get any reward for it? No. That's just the norm for him. For that child to get a reward, he'll have to do something special that lifts him into a zone that he personally chooses. Here's a child in a kosher home, eats a kosher breakfast. Any reward for that? No, it's just what he knows. Who's getting the reward? Some grandparent who sacrificed mightily to raise a family with those values in a cruel world and stayed strong and courageously attached to their Jewish values. That grandparent is no longer alive. He's going up and up and up in the spiritual world every time this child thoughtlessly does a mitzvah. That's a continuation, because the reward goes back to where the free will effort was made. This is very scary stuff. You walk in the morning and your friend walks past you. She really needs a friendly word. You're a little self-absorbed. You ignore her, you don't say something. Because of that slight, she becomes depressed, has a terrible day, does bad things. The bad things lead to other bad things. The damage multiplies and ramifies. It's all your problem. The reward or the punishment goes back to the point of free will, the assertion of free will or the failure of free will. Right? This is why in Jewish life we honor parents and grandparents and bygone generations. Not sentimental. When you do something because a parent inspired you, you make a donation, you buy books for a yeshiva, you start an educational program for children, you do it in the name of your parent or your grandparent. Not sentimental. That's only taking place in the world now because of something they did. You, the continuation of that program, but the credit goes back to where it began. Right? I'll give you two examples, and we'll have to stop there for this session. I'll give you two examples. Here's one. You know that on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur every year, the books of the living and the dead are opened. Right? And all souls are judged. All souls, all human souls, living and dead. Assessed every year. The Kabbalists ask this question: why would God judge the souls of the dead every year? By definition, they can't be any different than they were the year before. Let's get this clear. Every year, all souls are assembled, and Hashem judges every human soul. But dead people can't. A person died. During that year, they coasted with the momentum that they built up in life. You can't do, when you're dead, you can't do anything good or bad. There's no way you can change your spiritual situation. So why would they need a reassessment? A person who's living, every year, God looks at what you did that year and makes an assessment. But a person who's been dead, all year they've achieved nothing. By definition, that's what it means to be dead. Why do they need to be reassessed every year? And the answer is amazing and very scary. The reason a soul gets judged at the end of the year, because during that year while they've been dead, things have happened in the world that are the results of something they did when they were alive. And those things are now accruing to their account. Here's a person who had a child, and then he died. But the child had children, and the children had children, and now there's 3,768 great-great-great-grandchildren in the world. And all of them are doing is accruing to the credit of the person who began the process. Is that scary? To the extent that they're continuing what his value was. Not when they break away and wrench themselves into a new free choice area. If you raise children with good values, and your children live a life according to those values, you get the credit. Of course, they also get the credit for their choices. And if you bring up a child abused and disadvantaged, and the child plays out those forces in his personality, it's your problem, because you put that into the world and propagated that value. Right? This is the way you should think. This is the way you should think. You should think about the consequences. I know of a family in Israel many years ago who decided that instead of spending all their stocker money, their maaser, their charity money, on given away to poor people, they would make it a loan. But a loan with a difference. Here's what they did. After a number of years, they saved up $30,000, which at the time was enough for a down payment on an apartment in Jerusalem. They found a young couple getting married, and they said to them, we are presenting you a $30,000 down payment on an apartment. This means you'll be able to afford a home. But it's a loan, not a gift. But the loan has a condition. When you accrue enough money over the years to pay it back, you pay it back, but not to us. You find another young couple getting married, you pay the money to them with the same condition going forward. And a few families have now bought homes based. That's called bang for the buck. Right? I think that way. The consequences of the consequences, they go back to you. I'll leave you with a story. Again, okay, Abe, you're asking the right question. Does neurosis hinder your free will? Any mental incapacity, any mental illness, what does it do? Shifts your point of freedom. What does addiction do? Addiction shifts your point of freedom. Somebody else is not dealing with that addiction. It's not their problem. You are dealing with that addiction. It is your problem. It's at your point of freedom. And neurosis, not psychosis. Not talking about things that take away your free will entirely. Every mental state alters your point of freedom. Some it elevates and some it demotes. And that's not your fault. When a person is born disadvantaged with new emotional problems and family problems, it's not your fault. But God's not judging you for that. He's judging you on how well do you do at your level. This should be so clear. So clear. You have two children at school. Two brothers. One gets 100% for mathematics, always. One kid never gets more than 50. That's how it goes. One day the two kids come home after a test. The 100% kid got 99. The 50% kid got 55. You know what the response is? For the 55% child, the mother bakes a cake, the father buys him a bicycle, they dance on the table, they put him in the newspapers as a national hero. For the 99% kid, the father says, failure, idiot, failed. And he's right. If you're a 100% person and you got 99, you broke your record. You fell below your standard. That's a failure. And the 55% kid excelled himself. That's an incredible achievement. Any teacher who doesn't understand this doesn't deserve to be a teacher. We'll talk about this more. Let me leave you with a story. Here's the story. You see a person does an act and you see the consequences playing themselves out so clearly. I met a man once from Brooklyn, a Hasidic Jew. He came to South Africa to buy diamonds. I'm telling you a personal story. I know this story firsthand. This man's mother was pregnant in the Warsaw ghetto. She needed to see a doctor, just before the Germans killed everyone. She escaped from the ghetto, and she went to see a lady doctor, a Catholic woman from the old Polish aristocracy in the old city of Warsaw. This Christian lady treated this Jewish patient, and when she was about to leave, the doctor said to her, "If you go back into the Jewish ghetto, do you know what's going to happen to you?" The Germans were closing in. She said, "Yes, I know." The doctor said to her, "Come and stay with me." The Jewish woman said, "I cannot leave my husband." She said, "Bring him too." She said, "But I cannot leave my family." She said, "Bring them as well." The lady went back to the ghetto. She told her husband that this Christian woman was offering to save their lives. The husband said, "I cannot leave my family," so they took them as well. They arrived at this Christian lady's house with 13 people. She put them in her attic for 22 months, during which time the Gestapo occupied the house. They never left the attic for 22 months. Amazing things happened. I can't go into the whole story now. For 22 months they remained in the attic. She fed them and kept them clean. There was no bathroom. There was no water. She fed them and carried away their waste with her own hands every day. And all 13 survived. After 22 months she managed to get them across the border. All 13 have ended up in New York City. About 15 years ago in New York, one of those 13 people had a grandchild who got married. And at that wedding there were 200 people descended from the 13 people that she saved 80 years before. And they went back to Poland and they found her. Old lady. They brought her to be present at a Jewish wedding to see 200 people dancing around her. Children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren of 13 people that she saved so many years before. And during the meal someone walked up to her and said to her, "Why did you risk your life to save Jews?" She drew herself up and she said, "Because I read the Bible. And I saw that when God was about to wipe out Sodom, Abraham negotiated with God. And he said to God, if you can find 50 righteous people in the city, will you save the city?" And God said yes. 45 righteous people, and said God said yes. And she said, "I was hoping that there were enough of us to save Poland, and I was wrong." Now those are all her children. Right? Those are all her children. And the children's children are her children too. By the way, she died 3 or 4 years ago. Right? I actually heard this from the family. So you do an action and it ripples on and on and on and on. It's all yours. It's all yours. You operate at the point you find yourself placed at by the story that has led to where you are now. God's not judging that. He's judging bottom line. Bottom line. Paul, this story is told by, if you'd like to research it and get the details, you can ask Rabbi Ziskind, because his brother, Solomon Ziskind, was the business partner of this man. The man's name is Laser Wolf. Laser Wolf. Very dramatic and sad story in many other ways as well. And this Laser Wolf was the business partner of Solomon Ziskind, who now I think has moved from South Africa to Israel. Rabbi Ziskind can put you in touch with Laser if you'd like the details of the story. But anyway, be that as it may, and it may have been told somewhere, Paul, I don't know. But be that as it may, you are, when a child is disadvantaged, or a person has an emotional problem, not my fault, God did this to me, it's not, you're right, it's not your fault. But what your fault is what you do with what you've been given. Kids are taught today, well, it's not his fault, he's got an emotional problem, he's on the spectrum, he's this, he's that, the other. Yes, where you're operating is not your fault. It may be your parents' fault, or your grandparents' fault, or your teacher's fault, or God's fault. But the point is how you're coping at the position where you find yourself. That's where you're being tested. Right? Are you a 50% kid achieving 55? You're a genius. Are you a 100% kid achieving 99? You're a failure. Okay, I'll leave you with these thoughts. We are just beginning. A lot of interesting questions here which I cannot deal with now. Mitzvah Hashem, next week we will complete the discussion of the basic level of free will, and then we'll go into applications in Torah, and I hope you'll see how it pans out, and I hope you'll enjoy the discussion. Thank you and have a wonderful week.